The desert had a way of swallowing men whole, leaving nothing but dust and the echo of their choices. Isaac Monroe had lived on the edge of the Arizona plains for years, a solitary farmer with calloused hands and a wary heart, accustomed to the harsh silence of the Wild West. Every sunrise brought the same lonely routine, checking the fence, inspecting the well, listening to the wind whip across the barren land. But that morning, the wind carried something else, a sharp, piercing scream that cut through the stillness like a bullet. Isaac froze, heart pounding. It wasn't the cry of a coyote, nor the whistle of the wind through the mesquite. It was human, desperate, terrified. A girl bound and dragged across the dust by strangers with cold eyes, her spirit screaming for help louder than her voice ever could. Isaac knew that stepping in could mean danger, maybe death, yet something deep within stirred, compelling him to act. One small choice, one courageous act, one life saved, would set in motion a chain of events that neither the desert nor Isaac could have predicted. Before we dive into this story, take a moment to comment below with your location and what time it is where you are listening. And if you love stories of courage, heart, and the untamed Wild West, don't forget to subscribe and join us for the journey ahead. The desert air was thick with tension as Isaac Monroe knelt beside the girl, her small body trembling violently. Dust clung to her hair, her wrists were raw from the ropes, and the faint sheen of blood ran down her temples from bruises he hadn't yet dared to inspect. He had seen suffering before he had been raised on tales of skirmishes between settlers and Apache warriors, but nothing prepared him for the quiet desperation in her eyes. They were dark, alert, wary, like an animal that had learned too soon that the world could be cruel. Isaac loosened the ropes, carefully mindful not to startle her. Every movement was deliberate. One wrong gesture, one sudden sound, and the danger lurking beyond the thin curtain of the mesa could return to finish what they had begun. The wind swept across the plains, carrying the faint creak of wagon wheels and the distant, ominous echo of horses' hooves. He froze, straining to hear, but there was nothing immediate, only the desert settling back into its deceptive calm. He reached into his worn leather satchel and pulled out a tattered cloth dampened with water from his well. Gently he wiped the dust and blood from her face. She flinched at his touch, but did not pull away. That small act of trust, fragile as a candle flame in a windstorm, spoke volumes. Isaac's gut twisted. This was not a child lost by chance. She had been hunted. The question now was why and by whom? Isaac's eyes scanned the horizon. The mesas jutted sharply against the rising sun, casting long, spindly shadows across the plains. Somewhere out there beyond the light, Caleb Hargrove and his men might still be lurking, tracking their trail, waiting for the right moment to strike. Isaac had known the stories. Hargrove was a man who had made a career out of fear and ransom, a man who would not hesitate to kill. But the thought of turning back, leaving her there, it was impossible. Not now, not ever. He led her slowly toward his homestead, a lonely cabin of sun-baked wood, standing stubbornly at the edge of the mesa. The land around it was rough, uncultivated, with patches of sagebrush and tumbleweeds rolling lazily in the wind. Isaac had long ago given up hope of ever truly taming this soil. It was harsh, unforgiving, much like the people he had met in his 35 years of life. Yet today, it felt like the only sanctuary for both of them, a fragile shield against a world that seemed determined to crush them. As they walked, the girl Aiyana, as he would soon learn, finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost lost beneath the sighing wind. They will come back. The words were simple, but the fear behind them was tangible. Isaac nodded, though he knew words alone would not keep them safe. He glanced down at her small figure, noting how thin she was, how the sun had bleached her hair to a faint copper, how every step seemed like a struggle against both exhaustion and terror. Inside the cabin, Isaac moved with the familiarity of a man who had learned to survive in solitude. He fetched water, cleaned rags, and made a place for her on the floor with a rough blanket. She did not protest, but neither did she relax. Her eyes darted constantly, scanning shadows and corners, listening to every whisper of sound. Isaac understood trust was a luxury she could not afford, not yet. Night fell with the abruptness the desert was known for, bringing with it a chill that crept through the cabin's thin walls. The fire in the hearth cast flickering shadows, painting both of them in light and darkness, a constant reminder of the thin line between safety and danger. Isaac sat near the door, keeping his hand close to the rifle he never went without. He thought of his father, Jonathan Monroe, and the old lessons about courage, survival, and the respect owed to those who walk different paths. If his father had been alive, he might have said, "A man's heart is tested not in the comfort of peace, but in the shadow of danger." The hours dragged on. Isaac tried to speak with her to coax words out of her, but every attempt was met with silence or a glance that said, "Do not trust easily." He respected that. The desert had taught him patience, and he would need every ounce of it now. At some point during the night, the wind shifted. Isaac stiffened. A faint crunch of sand outside, subtle yet unmistakable, drew his gaze to the window. His heart thudded. Someone was moving beyond the range of his firelight. He held his breath rifle ready, waiting. But the night returned to silence, almost mocking in its calm. Aiyana shivered and curled slightly, and Isaac realized the enormity of what he had taken upon himself. This was no longer about rescue, it was about survival trust, and perhaps, in ways he could not yet articulate, redemption. He had been a man who lived in shadows, in quiet solitude, but the responsibility now was heavy and immediate. Every decision he made could save a life or end one. He sat beside her for a long while, letting the firelight soothe both their minds. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if Caleb Hargrove would track them down, or if Chief Nantan and the Apache warriors would come in anger or judgment. But he did know one thing: turning back was impossible. The girl, trembling and wary, had no one else, and he could not leave her to the desert, to the men who sought to control and exploit her. Outside, the stars blinked cold and indifferent, endless witnesses to the harshness of the land. Isaac allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, thinking of the choices that had brought him here. The bloodlines of his family intertwined with both settlers and Apache, and the precarious balance of honor and survival. He would face whatever came, but he could not yet see how fragile the peace of this night truly was. A sudden distant howl pierced the silence, and Aiyana flinched. Isaac's grip on his rifle tightened. Somewhere out there, someone or something was watching, waiting. The plain, so wide and open, seemed suddenly claustrophobic, every shadow a threat. And in that instant, Isaac knew that the rescue was only the beginning. The real journey, the real danger was just beginning. He settled back, keeping watch through the long night, knowing that when dawn came, they would both be tested in ways neither of them could yet imagine. One small act of courage had sparked a chain of events, and there would be no turning back. The morning sun crept over the horizon, casting a pale orange light across Isaac Monroe's small cabin. Outside, the desert stretched endlessly, a sea of jagged rocks and parched earth. But inside, the room was filled with a different kind of tension, one that weighed on the shoulders, heavier than the summer heat. Aiyana, the Apache girl, still huddled on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, eyes wide and unblinking. Every sound, every creak of wood, every whisper of wind made her flinch, as though expecting the hands of her captors to appear from the shadows. Isaac knelt across from her, careful not to invade her space. He had fetched water and a simple meal, stale bread, and a few strips of salted meat he kept for himself. He placed it gently in front of her, then sat back waiting. He knew that in moments like these, words could be as dangerous as bullets. Too much pressure, too much insistence, and she might retreat entirely into silence, or worse, panic. Hours passed. Isaac tried again, his voice low, even trying to coax her into speech. "It's all right," he said. "You're safe now. Nobody can hurt you here." Aiyana's lips pressed tightly together. She looked at him, then away. The shadows in her eyes were deep, a history of fear and mistrust etched into every glance. Isaac realized then that this girl had seen horrors most men would never survive, enough to leave her wary of anyone, even him. He respected that, knowing that trust like water in this desert was precious and scarce. The cabin was quiet, but for the faint crackle of the fire. Isaac's gaze wandered to the small window, scanning the horizon for movement. The desert, while beautiful in its starkness, held danger in every rustle of sand and brush. He could almost feel Caleb Hargrove's men lurking beyond the hills, or perhaps some other shadowed threat he could not yet name. And yet the girl before him was a more immediate puzzle. Aiyana shifted slightly, and Isaac noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes flicked toward every corner of the cabin. He could feel the story she wasn't telling, the secrets that weighed her down as much as her bruises. His thoughts drifted to the Apache stories he had heard as a boy from his father, Jonathan Monroe, who had known some of the older Apache warriors and respected their ways. Perhaps this girl carried not just her own fear, but that of her people, a silent legacy of caution and survival. Finally, she spoke, though not with words. A faint gesture, a tilt of the head, the narrowing of her eyes directed toward the door, then toward the small chest in the corner where Isaac kept his meager supplies. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Isaac understood. She was trying to communicate on her own terms. He nodded slowly, responding with a quiet affirmation. "I understand," he murmured. "Take your time. No rush." Despite her silence, Isaac sensed intelligence and cunning behind those dark eyes. She was not a frightened child in the sense of being helpless. She was alert, calculating, and careful. Every blink, every micro-expression spoke volumes. She was studying him as much as he was observing her measuring testing. The weight of that mutual appraisal created a strange bond, fragile yet potent, between two people from utterly different worlds. By midday, Isaac had managed to coax her into taking a small sip of water. Each gesture required patience, each glance a negotiation. The desert outside roared with heat, but inside the cabin, the tension was a different kind of furnace. Isaac could feel it in his chest, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge that this girl's life now rested in his hands. He had saved her from immediate danger, yes, but survival would demand far more than brute strength. It would demand understanding, empathy, and a careful navigation of the fears both of them carried. He tried to speak again softly in a voice that might carry a hint of comfort. "I know they came for you. I know it was not by chance, but I'm not going to let them take you again. You're safe here. I promise you that." She studied him for a long moment. Then, almost imperceptibly, she relaxed her fingers around her knees. It was a small victory, but a victory nonetheless. Isaac allowed himself a quiet sigh. It wasn't much, but it was something a crack in the wall she had built around herself. Even as he attended to her, Isaac's mind wandered, calculating the dangers that lay beyond the walls of the cabin. Caleb Hargrove would not give up easily, and the desert itself was a treacherous place for anyone attempting to hide. He needed a plan, a way to secure her, until he could understand the full scope of the threat. Yet he knew plans were fragile in a world governed by chance, greed, and violence. The hours passed slowly. The desert sun climbed higher, painting the cabin floor with harsh streaks of light and shadow. Isaac kept watch, every sense alert, every muscle tense for action. He began to notice subtle movements outside, a flicker of shadow on a distant hill, a stray tumbleweed that moved against the wind's direction, sounds that might have been imagined but could also herald danger. Rarest. He remained vigilant, for the desert taught a man to trust neither silence nor solitude. As evening approached, the air cooled slightly, carrying with it a different scent, the promise of night of darkness that could hide both predator and prey. Aiyana shifted again, her dark eyes meeting his for the briefest instant. No words were spoken, but a silent understanding passed between them. She would follow him for now, but the question lingered: for how long? How much could he protect her before the hunters returned? Isaac moved to stoke the fire, letting the flames crackle and hiss. Shadows danced across the walls, giving the impression of movement where there was none. He was aware that trust was a delicate thing, especially with a girl who had known only fear and cruelty. Every gesture, every glance, every moment of quiet was a negotiation of survival and respect. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Isaac sat back, rifle in hand, eyes never leaving the cabin's doorway. He could feel the weight of what lay ahead pressing on him, the responsibility, the danger, and the unspoken bond forming between himself and the silent girl who had appeared on his land that morning. Aiyana shivered slightly as the first chill of night settled over the cabin. Isaac draped a thin blanket over her shoulders, noting how fragile she looked, yet how fierce her spirit seemed beneath the surface. She was a paradox, delicate yet strong, wary, yet intelligent, silent, yet communicative in ways beyond words. Then came a sound that made Isaac freeze, a faint rustle almost imperceptible outside the cabin. His heart skipped a beat. The desert was vast, but he knew that nothing moved without purpose. Someone or something was there, watching, waiting. Isaac tightened his grip on his rifle, crouched low, and waited. Every second stretched painfully, the tension so thick it pressed against his chest. Aiyana's eyes darted toward the door, wide and fearful, yet she did not panic. She had learned long ago the cost of panic, and in that moment their understanding of each other deepened. They were no longer just rescuer and rescued. They were two people facing the unknown together, bound by circumstance, fear, and a fragile trust. The night deepened. The shadows outside remained unyielding and mysterious, and Isaac knew that tomorrow the real challenge would begin. Caleb Hargrove would come. The desert would test them both, and Aiyana's silence, powerful as it was, might hold the key to survival or disaster. He sat back, heart-pounding eyes flicking between the girl and the darkness outside, knowing that the morning could bring salvation or death. And in the silence between them, in the unspoken understanding, Isaac Monroe realized that their journey was far from over. Night had fallen over the desert, wrapping Isaac Monroe's cabin in a blanket of darkness so thick it seemed to devour sound itself. Outside, the wind whispered through the creosote bushes, carrying with it the faint metallic tang of distant danger. Inside, the small space was lit only by the flickering fire, casting long, jittering shadows across the worn wooden walls. The silence was unnatural taut, and every snap of a floorboard or creak of the roof seemed amplified in the stillness. Aiyana lay curled on the floor, wrapped in a rough blanket Isaac had provided. Her breathing was uneven, a quiet rhythm of exhaustion and lingering fear. Her dark eyes, wide and alert, scanned every corner of the room, as though anticipating the return of the men who had dragged her across the plains. Isaac watched her carefully, noting every subtle shift, every flicker of tension. She was exhausted, yes, but her mind was restless, and he knew instinctively that her alertness was not simply fear, it was survival. He moved quietly, fetching a jug of water and a cup from the shelf. The firelight danced across his weathered face, highlighting the lines of a man who had known hardship and solitude. He poured water into the cup, careful not to spill, and placed it near Aiyana. She did not reach for it immediately. Instead, she stared at the flames, lost in her thoughts. Isaac waited, giving her the space she needed, aware that trust was something earned gradually, step by step, moment by moment. Outside, the desert seemed alive with whispers. The wind shifted, carrying faint sounds that might have been animals, might have been distant riders, or might have been his imagination. Isaac's hand never left the rifle he kept at his side. Every sense was heightened, trained for survival by years of isolation, and the lessons his father, Jonathan Monroe, had imparted. One had to listen carefully in the desert. The smallest sound could be the difference between life and death. Hours passed. The fire burned low, casting the cabin into alternating patterns of light and darkness. Aiyana's breathing slowed, her eyes drooping, yet she did not fully relax. She flinched at the slightest noise, a creak of wood, the rustle of the wind, a faint thump outside, and each time Isaac's heart clenched. He understood her fear. He had seen too much of the world to underestimate the cruelty a man like Caleb Hargrove could inflict. A shadow moved across the window. Isaac's breath caught. He froze, every muscle-taut eyes straining in the darkness. The shadow was fleeting, perhaps a trick of the firelight, but in the desert, illusions could be deadly. He crouched low, gripping his rifle, listening. Aiyana shifted beside him, silent but attentive, her body tense with the knowledge that danger could appear without warning. Aye. Time stretched endlessly. The desert night was a living thing, pressing against the cabin walls with invisible hands. Isaac thought of his father, who had spoken often of patience and vigilance, of the importance of understanding one's environment. Tonight, those lessons mattered more than ever. Every sound, every shadow, every subtle movement could be a threat, and yet Isaac could not abandon Aiyana. He could not leave her to the desert, to Caleb Hargrove, or to fate itself. Aiyana finally whispered, her voice barely audible over the sighing wind. They follow. The words were simple, yet heavy with meaning. Isaac nodded, though he could offer no guarantee of safety. He understood that the night was far from over, that the desert was vast, and that the men who hunted her were relentless. He shifted slightly, ensuring his position near the doorway, rifle at the ready, eyes flicking to every corner of the cabin. Minutes dragged into hours. The fire crackled, hissing as it consumed the last of the logs. The shadows lengthened, twisting across the walls like fingers reaching for them. Aiyana shivered, and Isaac offered a blanket over her shoulders once more. She allowed it, a small sign of trust in the midst of uncertainty. Trust was fragile, he knew, but tonight it was all they had. Then came a sound that made Isaac's pulse quicken. A low, almost imperceptible thump outside the cabin, followed by the whisper of movement. He froze, straining his ears, every nerve on edge. Aiyana's dark eyes met his wide with recognition of the threat he had sensed, but she had also anticipated. He motioned for her to stay low, silently assessing the situation. The desert held its breath with them. Outside, the movement paused. Isaac considered his options. To investigate could be to walk into an ambush. To ignore it might mean danger creeping closer unseen. He was trained to survive in these conditions, to rely on instinct and the lessons of the land. Every decision carried weight. Every misstep could be fatal. Time seemed suspended. Aiyana remained still silent, her body rigid with vigilance. Isaac watched her, realizing that despite her youth, she was remarkably perceptive. She understood threats that a man twice her age might miss. Perhaps that was why she had survived being captured. Perhaps that was why she had survived until now. Another sound, this time a faint scraping against the outer wall, made Isaac tense. He rose slightly, keeping the rifle aimed, careful not to startle Aiyana. The shadow shifted again, moving closer, and then stopped. The desert night was cruel in its patience. The firelight flickered, revealing the outline of a branch brushing against the cabin, or perhaps a figure approaching. Isaac could not be sure. He whispered, barely moving his lips, "Stay close and do not make a sound." Aiyana obeyed instantly, curling tighter under the blanket. The silence between them was suffocating yet necessary. They were two souls caught in the web of a desert night, bound by fear-trust and the uncertainty of what awaited beyond the walls. Hours passed like this, a tense vigil in the cold desert night. Isaac's mind wandered to strategies, escape routes, the lessons his father had imparted, and the stories of Apache warriors he had heard as a boy. Each memory informed his decisions, each instinct honed for survival. Yet no preparation could have truly readied him for what this night might demand. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon, Isaac's eyes never left the doorway. The rustle outside had ceased for now, but he knew better than to assume safety. Caleb Hargrove was patient, cunning, and relentless. The desert offered no mercy to the complacent. Aiyana's dark eyes, alert and watchful, met his briefly. No words were needed. The unspoken agreement was clear. They would face whatever came together. And in that moment, Isaac Monroe realized something profound. The rescue was only the beginning. The desert had tested their courage, their patience, their trust. But the true trials, the ones that would define their fate, were yet to come. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains. Somewhere in the shadows, danger waited. And as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon, Isaac knew that the morning would bring a reckoning far greater than anything he had faced before. The first light of dawn stretched across the desert, painting the mesas and plains in muted shades of amber and gold. Isaac Monroe stepped cautiously outside his cabin, the rifle he carried feeling heavier than usual in his hands. The night had been long filled with tension and uncertainty, and the desert still whispered threats with every shifting breeze. He scanned the ground around the cabin, and that was when he saw them faint tracks pressed into the sand. Hoofprints interlaced with the marks of wagon wheels, and in the middle, smears of dried blood. His stomach twisted. Caleb Hargrove's presence was unmistakable. The man was ruthless, a predator who had turned cruelty into craft. The tracks told a story: someone had been taken dragged, and yet survived enough to leave behind a trail. Isaac studied the markings, his mind racing. The desert was vast, but Hargrove's men were meticulous. They would not allow a single loose end. And now, Aiyana's life hung precariously between his skill with a rifle, her own alertness, and sheer luck. Aiyana emerged from the cabin cautiously, her dark eyes scanning the ground. Isaac gestured for her to stay low. "Look," he said softly, pointing to the tracks. She crouched beside him, observing with silent intensity. She recognized the signs immediately, her brows furrowing in concentration. Isaac realized that her silence was not ignorance, but experience. She had survived much worse, and her people had taught her the subtle language of survival. "You see them," she murmured, voice low, almost a whisper. "They will come back." Isaac nodded grimly. He knew she was right. Hargrove would track them, and he would come with more than just men. He would come with traps, with calculated malice, with the cold precision of a man who viewed life as expendable currency. Isaac thought of the night, the rustle outside the shadows that had moved too deliberately to be mere branches. They had been watched, studied. The desert had kept secrets, but it had also left traces, and Isaac would follow them. He led Aiyana back inside, quickly securing doors and windows, moving with the knowledge that every detail mattered. He had learned in his father Jonathan Monroe's stories that survival depended on vigilance, preparation, and the ability to anticipate an enemy's moves. Caleb Hargrove was methodical. He would return, and when he did, there would be no mercy. Isaac's eyes lingered on Aiyana. Despite her young age, her composure under pressure was remarkable. She had endured the terror of capture, the bruises, the uncertainty, yet her eyes remained sharp, assessing, calculating. Isaac realized that she was not merely a victim, she was an ally, a partner in survival. But the burden of trust weighed heavily. One misstep, one lapse in judgment could spell disaster. The cabin was quiet now, the morning sun filtering through dust-streaked windows. Isaac moved cautiously, checking every corner, every shadowed space. He noticed a faint metallic glint near the back wall, small, almost imperceptible. Kneeling, he discovered a fragment of a chain broken and smeared with rust and old blood. His pulse quickened. Caleb Hargrove was not careless. This was deliberate, a message or a warning left for anyone foolish enough to interfere. Aiyana knelt beside him, her fingers tracing the fragment. "They will come," she said again with a certainty that made Isaac shiver. Her voice was small, yet it carried weight. "And they will not stop." Isaac had known danger, had faced threats, across the plains, had seen men driven mad by greed and fear, but the meticulous cruelty of Hargrove was different. It was not just a desire to dominate, it was a systematic plan, a cold calculation that left no room for error, and now they were both caught in its orbit. He moved outside again, rifle slung over his shoulder, and followed the tracks cautiously. The desert was quiet, deceptively so. A rabbit darted across the sand, a tumbleweed rolled lazily by. But Isaac's eyes were trained on the subtle signs, the disturbed earth, the faint drag marks in the sand, the imprint of boots too heavy to be anything other than men. The tracks led toward a rocky outcrop, a place where the wind carved shadows that could hide an army. Isaac paused, listening to the desert, reading it as his father had taught him. Every sound, every movement mattered. Suddenly, a glint of metal caught his eye, a reflection from a distant ridge. Isaac froze. He could just make out the silhouette of a figure mounted on a horse, watching, waiting. His heart pounded. Caleb Hargrove. There was no doubt. The man was patient, calculating, and utterly dangerous. He would not act rashly. He would observe, plan, and strike when the advantage was absolute. Isaac retreated quickly to the cabin, signaling to Aiyana without words. They needed a plan, a strategy, some form of preparation because the hunter had identified them. The desert, vast and open, offered few advantages, but Isaac knew its terrain intimately. They would use every bluff, every ridge, every shadow to their favor. Survival depended on cunning patience and a careful understanding of both the land and the enemy. Inside the cabin, Isaac whispered to Aiyana, explaining without details, instructing her on what to do if the men tried to breach their shelter. She nodded silently, her dark eyes gleaming with a mixture of fear and determination. Isaac realized that this night would demand more than courage. It would require every ounce of ingenuity and resolve he possessed. As the sun climbed higher, the heat of the desert pressed down on them. Isaac could feel the weight of the coming confrontation in every beat of sweat, every thump of his heart. Caleb Hargrove would not wait long. He was a man who thrived on control, on fear, on anticipation. And now Isaac and Aiyana were pieces in a game they had not chosen to play, but could not escape. The hours dragged on, the tension building like the taut string of a bow. Isaac checked the perimeter again, noting subtle changes in the landscape, a displaced rock, an unusual pattern in the sand. He knew Caleb Hargrove's men were close. He could feel it. And he could sense the girl beside him was aware, her instincts as sharp as any seasoned scout's. Then came the sound of hooves, faint but unmistakable, rising from the distance. Isaac froze. Aiyana's eyes widened and she grasped his arm lightly. They listened, every muscle tensed. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. And in that moment, Isaac realized the full scope of the danger they faced. Caleb Hargrove had not come alone. He had brought men, perhaps dozens, and they would descend with a precision and ruthlessness that the desert would remember long after. Isaac tightened his grip on his rifle heart, racing mind already forming plans for defense, for escape, for survival. He glanced at Aiyana. Though silent, she was ready. Her eyes reflected the firelight, bright and unwavering, a mirror of his own determination. They would face what was coming together, or they would not face it at all. And as the sound of hooves grew louder, echoing across the plains, Isaac Monroe knew that the morning would bring a reckoning. The desert, vast and merciless, was no longer their ally. It was the stage for a confrontation that would test their courage, wits, and trust. Caleb Hargrove was coming, and when he arrived, nothing would be the same again. The desert sun had climbed higher, scattering shadows across the plains and igniting the sands in a pale, searing gold. Isaac Monroe kept a watchful eye on the horizon, every muscle tense, every sense sharpened by the lingering threat of Caleb Hargrove and his men. The hooves of the distant riders had vanished for now, but the threat remained as palpable as the heat that pressed against their skin. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with anticipation, the silence heavy, almost suffocating. Aiyana sat cross-legged near the fire, her dark eyes fixed on the flickering flames. For the first time since he had rescued her, she spoke in a voice clear and steady, though still quiet, like a whisper meant for the desert itself rather than the cabin. "I am not an ordinary girl," she said, her gaze briefly meeting Isaac's before flicking away. "I am the daughter of Chief Nantan." Isaac felt a chill despite the desert heat. He had heard stories of Chief Nantan, a leader respected and feared among the Apache. Known for his wisdom and unflinching resolve, Nantan commanded loyalty, not through fear alone, but through a profound understanding of honor and survival. The weight of Aiyana's revelation settled over Isaac like a sudden desert storm. The girl he had rescued was no longer just a victim. She was the child of a man whose reach extended across the plains, whose influence could alter the course of life and death in ways Isaac could barely comprehend. He remained silent for a moment, letting the weight of the words sink in. Then carefully, he asked, They took you for ransom." His voice was low measured. He could see her flinch at the mention of Caleb Hargrove, a name that seemed to carry the echoes of violence in her mind. Aiyana nodded slightly. "Hargrove. He wants leverage. He wants my people to bend to pay to fear. And he will not stop until he gets it." Her eyes met his, now dark and unwavering, yet carrying the shadow of countless fears. I have survived worse than the desert Isaac Monroe, but I cannot survive them alone." Isaac absorbed her words, understanding more fully the danger they faced. Caleb Hargrove was not a man to negotiate with. He was a predator patient, meticulous and cruel. And now the stakes had escalated. They were no longer merely fleeing the desert. They were entwined in a web of tribal politics, greed, and vengeance that could swallow them whole. For the first time, Isaac allowed himself a brief glance at her face, noting the strength beneath her delicate frame. The bruises and dirt were evidence of her suffering, but the fire in her eyes revealed resilience. She was not merely a girl in need of protection. She was a partner in survival, someone whose instincts might very well save them both. He felt a surge of respect tempered with the solemn weight of responsibility. "Why didn't you speak sooner?" Isaac asked gently, his tone careful not to startle her. "Why hide your name, your story?" Aiyana's gaze dropped to her hands. "I cannot trust easily," she admitted. "Not anymore. Not since the day they came. I have learned silence can save lives. And in the desert, it is the quickest way to survive." Her words carried the cadence of experience far beyond her years, shaped by both fear and necessity. Isaac nodded silently, acknowledging her wisdom. Trust was a fragile commodity in these lands, earned in increments measured by deeds rather than words. And yet something subtle had shifted between them, a quiet acknowledgement, an unspoken bond forming amid the tension. He realized that this bond, however delicate, might be their only weapon against the dangers awaiting them. He rose and moved to the window, scanning the distant horizon. The desert was a deceptive expanse. Rocks and dunes could conceal both friend and foe. Caleb Hargrove could return at any moment, and his men would not hesitate to use lethal force. Isaac's mind raced with strategies, escape routes, defensive positions, and contingencies. Every detail mattered, for the slightest oversight could be fatal. Returning to the fire, Isaac crouched beside Aiyana, careful to show no sign of impatience or alarm. "We will need to be smart," he said quietly. "Every move counts. We cannot predict Hargrove's every action, but we can control our own. Together we might just survive this." Aiyana's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, a fleeting acknowledgement of the partnership forming between them. Though her body remained tense, her posture guarded, there was an unspoken understanding. They were allies bound by circumstance, necessity, and now mutual trust. Hours passed in this delicate rhythm, punctuated by the occasional creak of wood, the faint whistle of the wind, and the distant cries of desert wildlife. Isaac moved about the cabin, methodically checking provisions, fortifying doors, and preparing for the worst. He had learned from his father that in moments of uncertainty, preparation could mean the difference between life and death. As twilight approached, the desert's shadows deepened, lengthening across the cabin floor like dark fingers reaching for them. Isaac noticed Aiyana's subtle shift in posture, her gaze toward the window, her hand brushing a hidden dagger she had produced without him noticing. He realized that she was not simply relying on him. She was prepared to defend herself, to act decisively if the situation demanded. The thought brought a measure of reassurance. Caleb Hargrove was formidable, but together they possessed a combination of cunning courage and adaptability that might just level the playing field. The desert had taught Isaac the value of observation, patience, and calculated risk. Aiyana's presence added intuition, stealth, and resilience. They were learning to operate as a unit, a partnership forged in the crucible of imminent danger. Night fell fully, the firelight flickering against the walls as the desert outside turned into a sea of shadows. Isaac and Aiyana sat in a careful silence, communicating through glances, gestures, and subtle movements. Trust was being built slowly, quietly, amid the palpable tension of a night that threatened to stretch endlessly. Then came a sound, faint, deliberate, almost imperceptible. Footsteps, a branch breaking, or the calculated approach of men who had tracked them across miles of harsh desert terrain. Isaac froze, listening intently. Aiyana's eyes mirrored his alertness, her body coiled and ready. They shared a glance, understanding without words that the danger was approaching and that the night's trials were far from over. Isaac Monroe knew with certainty that Caleb Hargrove's shadow would return, bringing with it not just men, but calculated malice, intent on retrieving what he believed was his. And Aiyana, daughter of Chief Nantan, would not be just a prize in this game. She would be a force of her own, fierce and unyielding, testing Isaac's courage and judgment in ways he could not yet foresee. The desert lay quiet once more, deceptive and endless. But inside the cabin, a fragile alliance had been formed, a bond born of necessity, fear, and the first sparks of mutual understanding. The challenges ahead would demand every ounce of their courage, skill, and wits. And in that moment, Isaac realized the journey to survive, to protect, and perhaps to change the course of destiny had only just begun. The desert night had receded, leaving the plains bathed in a muted light, the sun hanging low like a guardian over the horizon. Isaac Monroe sat by the cabin's doorway, rifle across his knees, eyes scanning the distant hills. The events of the past days, the rescue of Aiyana, the tracks of Caleb Hargrove, the subtle cues that danger lingered pressed upon him with the weight of inevitability. Yet amidst the urgency, his thoughts drifted to a man long gone, his father, Jonathan Monroe. Jonathan had been a man of the frontier, forged by the harshness of the West, shaped by the delicate balance between settlers and the Apache tribes that had once roamed freely across the lands Isaac now called home. Isaac remembered the stories whispered by his father by the firelight of diplomacy and respect, of grudges, held but not acted upon, of alliances that had saved lives in the most unlikely ways. His father had understood the land, its people, and the fragile thread by which peace was maintained. Isaac's fingers brushed the wood of the rifle as memories returned. His father had been a bridge of sorts, a man who had earned trust on both sides, who had spoken to Apache leaders with sincerity, and who had always insisted that survival depended on understanding, not domination. Jonathan Monroe had been close to Chief Nantan, a man of quiet wisdom and unyielding resolve. The bond had been unspoken, grounded in mutual respect and necessity. And now Isaac realized that bond might extend to him, to Aiyana, to the very life he was trying to preserve. But the desert did not care for past alliances. It demanded action, vigilance, and the courage to face threats directly. Caleb Hargrove had no respect for bonds, no understanding of loyalty beyond fear and profit. His men were trained to hunt and to kill, and he himself was a master of patience and intimidation. Isaac knew that Hargrove would strike again, and soon. The thought tightened a knot in his chest. He looked at Aiyana, who sat silently watching the horizon with the same intensity he felt pressing in his own chest. She had revealed her lineage, her connection to Chief Nantan, and now the weight of her position settled heavily over both of them. She was not merely a child. She was a symbol, a spark of leverage in a world that thrived on control and fear. Isaac's mind raced, considering the possibilities, the dangers, the outcomes that could spiral beyond his ability to intervene. Jonathan Monroe had once told him, "A man's courage is measured not by his victories, but by the lives he chooses to protect when the world offers no reward." Isaac thought of those words now. The man he had rescued, Aiyana, was not just a life to be defended. She was a testament to his father's legacy, a chance to act with honor in a land where morality often bent under the weight of survival. He could not fail her, not now. The desert stretched endlessly, but Isaac's attention was drawn to the subtle signs of movement, the shift of sand over distant ridges, the faint glint of sunlight off metal in the distance, the irregular pattern of animal tracks that could easily mask human intruders. Caleb Hargrove would not act recklessly. He was patient, deliberate, and aware that a wrong move could cost him more than he was willing to lose. Isaac knew that understanding his enemy's mindset was as crucial as knowing the terrain. Aiyana spoke softly, breaking the heavy silence. "Your father, he respected my people." Her voice was calm, measured, yet held a weight that Isaac had not anticipated. He looked at her, sensing the connection she drew, the unspoken trust his father had cultivated that now passed to him. "He taught you lessons, didn't he?" she added, her eyes searching his. Isaac nodded slowly, memories of his father flooding back the nights spent learning the delicate balance between survival and empathy. The careful attention to the smallest details, the reverence for life, even in a world that often treated it carelessly. Jonathan Monroe had imparted wisdom in ways subtle and profound, lessons that Isaac had perhaps underestimated until this moment. Now facing danger and the unknown, those lessons were not just memories, they were tools for survival. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. He did. He taught me to listen, to watch, to act only when necessary, but with conviction when I do. Aiyana's gaze softened, and though she did not speak, the silent acknowledgement between them deepened the fragile trust they were building. The wind shifted, carrying with it the faint sound of distant hooves, subtle yet deliberate. Isaac's senses sharpened immediately. Caleb Hargrove was moving again, and Isaac could feel the approach, the calculated pace, the silent intent of a predator who had tracked his prey across miles of unforgiving desert. He rose slowly, positioning himself near the doorway, rifle-ready eyes scanning every shadow, every ridge, every movement that could hint at danger. Aiyana's hand brushed lightly against his arm, a silent signal of readiness. Isaac understood. They were a team now bound not by words, but by circumstance, necessity, and a shared understanding of the stakes. The desert, vast and merciless, had narrowed around them, and the next hours would demand every ounce of courage, intelligence, and resolve they possessed. Isaac thought of his father again. Jonathan Monroe had taught him the value of foresight, the importance of considering not just immediate threats, but the ripple effects of each decision. He realized that Caleb Hargrove was not merely seeking a ransom, he was testing them, probing for weaknesses, measuring their resolve. And just as his father had done, Isaac would need to anticipate, to calculate, to act decisively when the moment demanded it. The sun climbed higher, casting long, stark shadows across the desert floor. Isaac and Aiyana moved carefully, checking every entry point to the cabin, every potential hiding place, every possible vantage point. The heat pressed down upon them, but the tension was far heavier than the physical discomfort. Caleb Hargrove's presence was a shadow that had already crept into every corner of their awareness. And Isaac knew that the coming confrontation would not be a simple fight. It would be a test of strategy, endurance, and the fragile trust that had begun to form between them. Suddenly, a distant sharp whistle cut through the air, faint but unmistakable. Isaac froze, recognizing it immediately as a signal, a mark of Hargrove's men. Aiyana's eyes widened, and she instinctively moved closer, yet remained composed, ready for the next move. The desert, silent and expansive, now felt like a cage. The shadow of Caleb Hargrove loomed ever closer, and Isaac realized with clarity the choices they made in the coming hours would determine not just their survival, but the fate of the fragile trust that bound them together. And in that moment, Isaac Monroe understood the weight of legacy of lessons passed down, and the courage required to act when the past, present, and future collided under the scorching sun of the Wild West. The desert sun had sunk low, casting a fiery glow across the mesas and sand-swept plains. Shadows lengthened like creeping fingers, stretching across the cabin of Isaac Monroe and the fragile refuge he shared with Aiyana. The tension in the air was thick, almost tangible, a quiet storm that neither could ignore. Every sound seemed magnified, the distant cry of a hawk, the rustle of a tumbleweed, the whisper of the wind across the rocks. Each noise was a reminder they were not alone. Isaac's fingers tightened around the rifle knuckles white. He had spent hours pacing, observing, and preparing for the inevitable confrontation with Caleb Hargrove and his men. Every instinct he possessed screamed caution, but his heart and sense of duty were louder. He glanced at Aiyana, her eyes fixed on the horizon with a calm vigilance that belied her youth. She had faced horrors he could only imagine, and yet she remained poised, alert, a testament to both her lineage and her unyielding spirit. He spoke softly, almost to himself, yet loud enough for her to hear. "There's no turning back, Aiyana. Not now. Whoever comes, we face them together." She nodded, the faintest tremor in her hand, betraying the tension she kept hidden beneath her composed exterior. Trust had been hard won, but it was now solid enough to form the foundation of their partnership. The sun dipped further, the horizon glowing like embers in a dying fire. Isaac surveyed the terrain, marking the ridges, the mesas, and the small rocky outcrops that could serve as cover. Every decision mattered. Every choice could mean the difference between survival and death. He realized that protecting Aiyana was not a matter of reaction. It was a proactive endeavor. They could not wait for danger to arrive. They had to anticipate it. Aiyana shifted slightly, her hand brushing the small dagger she carried hidden beneath her cloak. Isaac caught the movement in the corner of his eye and nodded subtly. She was ready. And so was he. They would not be passive victims of circumstance. They would act, they would endure, and they would survive. As darkness settled over the desert, the first stars appeared, faint pinpricks in the vast indigo sky. The desert night was deceptive, serene, yet full of peril. Isaac's mind raced through every possible scenario. He considered the number of men Hargrove could have brought, the weapons they might wield, the tactics they could employ. There was no room for error. Every detail mattered, positioning, timing, and the element of surprise. He moved quietly to the window, scanning the horizon for movement. A faint glimmer caught his eye, the reflection of metal, a flash of something unnatural among the rocks. His pulse quickened. Caleb Hargrove's presence was near deliberate, calculated. He would not act hastily. He would wait for the precise moment to strike. Isaac knew that this waiting, this anticipation, was part of the predator's game, and he could not allow fear to dominate him. Inside, Aiyana whispered, her voice low, "They are close." Her gaze was steady, her posture ready, and Isaac recognized the depth of her perception. She had survived countless dangers learned from the land and the people who had shaped her, and now she was guiding him silently and with precision toward the decisions that would keep them alive. Isaac nodded once, acknowledging her warning without words. They were aligned, their trust deepened by shared danger. Every instinct, every careful movement was informed by their understanding of each other. They were no longer just rescuer and rescued, they were partners bound by circumstance, necessity, and the fragile thread of mutual reliance. The hours stretched onward, each minute a taut string ready to snap. Outside, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The wind stilled, and even the nocturnal creatures were silent, as though sensing the approaching confrontation. Isaac knew they would not wait for him to make a mistake. The desert Hargrove and fate itself would test him relentlessly. He moved to the back of the cabin, inspecting every door, every shutter, every possible entry point. Aiyana followed silent, observing, ready. They fortified their small refuge as best they could with the limited resources at hand. Isaac stacked heavy objects against the doors, checked the locks, and prepared the rifles. Each preparation was a small bulwark against the encroaching threat, a testament to their resolve and determination. Then came the faint, deliberate sound of hooves, distant at first but growing steadily, punctuated by the subtle creak of leather and the muted shuffle of sand beneath hooves. Isaac froze, signaling Aiyana to remain quiet. Their eyes met briefly, a silent communication that spoke volumes. The enemy was near, and the moment of action was approaching. He crouched low, rifle at the ready, mind calculating angles, distances, and timing. Every muscle coiled, every sense alert. He could feel the desert's pulse, the subtle shifts in sand and wind, the way the shadows moved across the terrain, and the faint glint of metal that betrayed the approach of men who thought themselves hidden. Caleb Hargrove was coming, and Isaac Monroe would not falter. Aiyana shifted slightly, moving closer. Isaac placed a steadying hand on her shoulder. "Steady," he whispered. "We hold our ground. Whatever happens, we face it together." Her hand tightened briefly on her dagger, her eyes dark and unwavering. He knew she was ready, that her courage matched his own, that their bond was now forged in the crucible of imminent danger. The sound of hooves intensified, echoing across the desert floor. Shadows moved among the rocks, deliberate, coordinated. Isaac could see the faint outline of figures, now men armed and moving with precision. Hargrove had come prepared, patient, and deadly. The desert which had seemed a refuge now became a stage for confrontation. Isaac adjusted his position, aiming for the high ground near the doorway, calculating angles, coverage, and the possible paths of attack. He could hear Aiyana's controlled breathing beside him, a rhythm of readiness and determination. They were aligned, their focus absolute, and yet the tension was suffocating. Every second stretched, every shadow could conceal death. Suddenly a sharp whistle cut through the night. Isaac's pulse spiked. The men had signaled each other coordinated, ready to strike. He gritted his teeth, feeling the full weight of responsibility. Caleb Hargrove would not wait. He would act decisively, exploiting any hesitation. And Isaac knew that hesitation was a luxury they could not afford. He looked at Aiyana one last time, nodding slightly. She returned the gesture, her eyes conveying resolve, trust, and an unspoken understanding. Whatever came next, they would face it together without retreat, without compromise. And in that moment, Isaac Monroe realized with absolute clarity there was no turning back. The desert had closed in around them, the hunter was near, and their survival depended not just on courage, but on unity, intelligence, and the willingness to face the storm head-on. The night had stretched into hours that seemed endless, each second thick with anticipation and danger. Isaac Monroe sat near the cabin door, his rifle resting across his knees, eyes tracing every shadow that shifted across the desert floor. The moon had long since retreated, leaving only the dim starlight to illuminate the land in faint silver washes. The desert held its breath, waiting for the first sign of movement from Caleb Hargrove or his men, and Isaac knew they could appear at any moment. Aiyana remained crouched beside him, silent and watchful. The fire had burned low, casting long, trembling shadows across the walls, and every creak of wood or whisper of wind seemed magnified, a harbinger of the threats lurking outside. Despite the exhaustion that weighed on both of them, neither moved to rest. Their vigilance had become instinct, a rhythm of survival honed by necessity. Isaac's mind raced as he scanned the horizon. Every ridge, every rock outcrop, every subtle shift in the sand was a potential hiding place for enemies. Caleb Hargrove was patient, methodical, and ruthless. He would not act recklessly. He would wait, observe, and strike when the advantage was absolute. The desert, vast and seemingly empty, was deceptive. Shadows concealed predators, and silence could mask the approach of death itself. Aiyana's fingers brushed against her dagger, hidden beneath her cloak. Isaac noticed the subtle movement and offered a brief nod, a silent acknowledgement of her readiness. They were no longer simply rescuer and rescued. They were allies bound by circumstance, fear, and a fragile trust that had grown steadily through shared danger. Her calm composure, despite the danger, impressed him. She was a child in years, perhaps, but a warrior in spirit, tempered by fear and the lessons of survival. The first hints of dawn began to stain the horizon, a faint golden light creeping over the mesas and spilling across the desert. The change in light revealed subtle movements among the rocks, shapes that could be animals or the scouts of Hargrove's party. Isaac's pulse quickened. Every instinct screamed vigilance. The desert, beautiful and merciless, offered no guarantees. He whispered to Aiyana, his voice low, careful not to carry beyond the cabin walls. "Stay close. Watch the light. Any movement could be them." She nodded, her eyes dark and unwavering, scanning the horizon with the precision of someone accustomed to tracking threats, her body coiled like a spring ready to respond. The morning air was crisp, carrying the scent of dust and sagebrush. A rabbit darted across the open plains, and a breeze shifted the sand in faint, irregular patterns. Isaac observed these signs, reading them as carefully as he would read human movement. The desert spoke in subtle shifts and imperceptible sounds, revealing threats if one knew how to listen. A faint crack of a branch reached his ears. He froze, listening intently. It was subtle, easily missed by an inattentive observer, but Isaac's experience and acute awareness told him it was deliberate. Someone was moving closer, carefully, methodically, as though testing the environment before committing to action. He raised his rifle slightly, eyes fixed on the area from which the sound had come, while Aiyana mirrored his caution, ready for anything. Minutes stretched heavy and tense. Isaac considered every possibility. Hargrove's men were trained patient and ruthless. They would not reveal themselves until the moment was right, and when that moment came, it would be deadly. He thought of past encounters, of the stories his father, Jonathan Monroe, had told him about skirmishes and ambushes, about the balance between courage and strategy. Those lessons were no longer abstract, they were now life and death. Aiyana's quiet presence beside him was a reminder of why he could not falter. Her dark eyes, alert and calculating, reflected both fear and determination. He realized that in her silence lay wisdom. She understood the desert, the land, and the predators that roamed it better than most settlers ever could. Her instincts complemented his own experience, creating a partnership that, if maintained, might see them through the trials ahead. The faint sound of hooves reached him next, distant but deliberate. Isaac tensed. His pulse quickened. The enemy was approaching, moving under the faint dawn light, careful not to reveal their numbers or positions prematurely. He glanced at Aiyana, who gave a subtle nod, and he knew they were ready. Their survival depended on alertness, patience, and decisive action when the moment came. The sun's first rays painted the desert in harsh contrast, illuminating ridges and boulders that had been hidden in darkness. Shadows shifted, revealing forms, men in the distance, observing, coordinating, waiting for the optimal moment. Caleb Hargrove had arrived. The hunter had found his prey. Isaac silently checked the cabin's defenses, doors, secured windows, reinforced as best as he could. Fire prepared to illuminate threats if needed. Every detail mattered. Every decision could tip the balance between life and death. The desert's silence pressed on them, an unyielding weight of anticipation. Aiyana's hand brushed his arm. He understood instantly she had spotted something he had not. His eyes followed her gaze to the horizon, a movement subtle, precise, the approach of one of Hargrove's men, scanning, testing, observing. The desert was alive with threats, and Isaac knew the time to act could come at any moment. The first glimmers of light revealed more shapes among the rocks, figures moving deliberately with coordination. Hargrove was patient, methodical, using the dawn to conceal his advance while gaining the strategic advantage. Isaac adjusted his position, taking cover, rifle, steady, muscles coiled and ready. He breathed, slowly, controlled, aware that panic could ruin everything. Aiyana mirrored his calm, her eyes never leaving the movement outside. They were a team now, their instincts intertwined, each drawing strength and focus from the other. The desert, once a backdrop, was now a crucible, testing their resolve, courage, and trust. Suddenly, a sharp whistle echoed across the plains. Isaac froze, heart pounding. Aiyana's eyes narrowed, and she gripped her dagger with steady hands. The signal was unmistakable. Hargrove's men had coordinated their approach. They would strike soon, and when they did, there would be no room for error. Isaac's mind raced, calculating angles, predicting movements, anticipating the strategies of men who were trained killers. Every decision, every breath, every subtle shift of weight mattered. He glanced at Aiyana one last time before the imminent confrontation. Their unspoken bond, forged through shared danger and cautious trust, would be the only thing standing between them and disaster. The desert held its breath. The horizon seemed to shrink, the shadows stretching and bending as the first rays of sunlight illuminated the advancing figures. Caleb Hargrove had arrived. The reckoning was near, and Isaac Monroe knew with absolute certainty the morning would demand every ounce of courage, skill, and resolve they possessed. The sun had fully risen over the desert, painting the plains in harsh hues of gold and ochre. Isaac Monroe crouched behind a low outcrop of sandstone, rifle in hand, his breath steady despite the pounding of his heart. Across the undulating ridges, faint shapes moved, figures too deliberate to be animals, too coordinated to be wanderers. Caleb Hargrove's men were advancing silently, methodically, testing the terrain, and Isaac knew that the moment of confrontation was near. Aiyana sat beside him, her posture coiled like a spring. Though young, her gaze was piercing, scanning every shadow, every rock, every ridge. She had learned from her people the art of observation, of patience, of anticipating threats before they arrived. Isaac admired her composure, understanding that she was no ordinary girl. She was the daughter of Chief Nanton, and the instinctive wisdom passed down from her people now guided their actions. Isaac gestured silently, pointing to the distant ridge where the enemy had taken position. The men were spread out, their movements calculated, each step deliberate. Hargrove had chosen this location for a reason. It provided cover, visibility, and the element of intimidation. Isaac studied the slope, noting the rocks and dips that could offer concealment, the shadows that could shield their movements. Every detail mattered. Every misstep could be fatal. He whispered to Aiyana, "Stay low, watch the flanks. We'll use the terrain to our advantage." She nodded, her eyes never leaving the advancing figures. Isaac had long understood the desert's language, the way shadows fell, the subtle shifts of sand, the wind's direction. Now every lesson his father had taught him came to life, demanding attention, precision, and calm under pressure. The figures moved closer, their silhouettes clearer against the pale morning light. Weapons, glinted rifles slung or raised the posture of men trained to hunt and to kill. Caleb Hargrove was a strategist, and Isaac could feel the meticulous planning behind every step, every pause, every glance. The desert was his battlefield, and he knew it intimately. But Isaac had something equally powerful knowledge of the land patience and Aiyana at his side. The air between them and the enemy was taut, charged with anticipation. Isaac adjusted his position, eyes narrowing, calculating distances, angles, and timing. He had learned to trust his instincts, honed by years alone in the harsh, unforgiving West. Every rock, every ridge, every shadow was now a potential ally or threat. Aiyana mirrored his readiness, her fingers brushing her hidden dagger, ready for the first strike. A sudden gust of wind shifted the sand, carrying faint scents that told Isaac more than any words could. The enemy was alert, scanning, coordinating, but they had underestimated the patience and cunning of someone familiar with the land. Isaac moved a fraction, keeping low, signaling subtly to Aiyana. They were preparing for the encounter on their terms, not theirs. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The figures crested the hill, revealing themselves, fully rifles glinting, eyes alert. Caleb Hargrove, unmistakable even from a distance, observed with the predator's patience, noting the terrain, the position of his targets, and the potential for ambush. Isaac and Aiyana remained unseen, a shadow among shadows blending with the desert, ready to turn the hunter's patience against him. Isaac's mind raced, recalling every lesson, every story his father, Jonathan Monroe, had imparted. Trust in instincts, observation over impulse, patience over haste. Hargrove's men were methodical, but the desert was alive with its own rules, and Isaac had learned to listen to its whispers. Every sound, every shadow, every movement became a guide, a warning, a tool. He caught Aiyana's eye and nodded. They would act together, coordinated, using the high ground, the rocks, the shadows to create an advantage. The desert had taught them well, and now survival demanded precision, courage, and resolve. She understood instinctively, moving in sync, silent, yet deliberate. Then came the faintest whistle, almost imperceptible over the desert's stillness. Isaac stiffened. It was a signal, and Hargrove's men shifted accordingly, moving with renewed coordination. The first real test was at hand. Isaac whispered, "Now we hold, no mistakes." Aiyana's eyes were steady, her hand gripping the hilt of her dagger, every muscle ready. The figures drew nearer, their intent clear. Hargrove's men were confident, accustomed to compliance, accustomed to terror. But Isaac and Aiyana were no ordinary targets. Their partnership, forged in the crucible of desert danger, had prepared them for this moment. Every second counted, every misstep could mean death. Isaac's mind worked through possibilities, contingencies, and strategies. Should he draw fire to lure them into a trap? Should he attempt to isolate the scouts before Hargrove acted? The desert offered choices, but only one path would preserve their lives. He signaled to Aiyana, the silent language they had developed over days, indicating the plan. They moved simultaneously, small, deliberate steps, keeping low, using rocks and shadows for cover. Each movement was measured, every breath controlled. The enemy, confident yet unaware of the vigilance behind the cover, was vulnerable in ways they did not anticipate. The desert, silent and vast, became both shield and stage for the confrontation. Suddenly, a shout broke the tension, piercing the morning air. One of Hargrove's men had spotted movement, and the fragile veil of secrecy shattered. Isaac and Aiyana froze, hearts racing, ready for the inevitable clash. The desert seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the first action, the first shot, the first decision that would determine life or death. Isaac's finger tightened on the rifle, and Aiyana's stance shifted, dagger poised. They were ready, fully aware that retreat was no longer an option. The enemy advanced, unaware that the hunter they pursued was no longer passive. Every shadow, every ridge, every stone was now a potential ally in the coming struggle. And in that moment, Isaac Monroe knew that the balance had shifted. The figures on the hill were no longer simply threats. They were the catalysts of a reckoning that would test every skill, every instinct, every ounce of courage he possessed. The desert was quiet, yet the tension screamed louder than any noise. The first move would define the rest, and Isaac and Aiyana were ready to seize the moment. The early morning sun had shifted, casting long golden shadows across the desert floor. Isaac Monroe stood near the edge of the ridge, rifle in hand, eyes fixed on the approaching figures of Hargrove's men. Yet his focus was momentarily drawn elsewhere, a sudden movement along a distant ridge, deliberate, confident, commanding. A figure emerged, walking with the calm authority of someone accustomed to control and respect. Chief Nanton had arrived. Aiyana stiffened beside Isaac, her dark eyes wide, reflecting both recognition and awe. She whispered softly, almost reverently, "Father." The word carried weight beyond explanation, a reminder of her heritage, of the authority she represented, and of the power behind the man now stepping onto the sands below. Isaac's breath caught. He had known of Chief Nanton by reputation, but seeing him in person moving with such presence and certainty was something else entirely. Nanton's gaze swept over the terrain, taking in the scattered riders of Hargrove, the rough shelter of Isaac's cabin, and the subtle positions of the two figures who had dared to intervene in his daughter's peril. He did not speak at first. The desert itself seemed to hold its breath. Isaac sensed the weight of judgment in those dark, penetrating eyes, a scrutiny that evaluated not just action, but intent, courage, and alignment with honor. Aiyana stepped forward slightly, signaling with her eyes that Isaac should remain silent. She knew her father's ways, the measured approach, the assessment of character, the slow unraveling of truth before any action was taken. Isaac observed quietly, recognizing that this was a different battlefield, one of respect and diplomacy, rather than raw force. Yet the threat of Hargrove's men remained ever present, a looming shadow over the conversation. Chief Nanton finally spoke, his voice calm, deep, carrying across the ridge with authority. "Isaac Monroe," he said, enunciating the name with care. "You have intervened in matters that touch both honor and blood. Why?" His eyes, sharp as obsidian, bore into Isaac's, searching for truth, for motive, for the kernel of intention that defined the man before him. Isaac swallowed, steadying his voice. "I could not let harm come to her," he replied evenly, gesturing toward Aiyana. "She was in danger. I did what I had to do." Nanton's expression was inscrutable. For a long moment he said nothing, allowing the desert wind to carry the silence between them. The weight of history, of unspoken agreements, and past alliances hung heavily. Isaac felt the measure of the man's scrutiny pressing upon him, and yet he did not falter. He had acted with conviction, and he would not apologize for the protection of an innocent life. Aiyana's hand brushed Isaac's arm, a subtle acknowledgement of support, of trust, of shared understanding. The young Apache girl had come to rely on him, and he on her instincts. Their partnership, fragile yet potent, had survived the night, and the subtle movements of Hargrove's scouts. Now, under the gaze of her father, the bond was about to be tested in a new way. Chief Nanton continued, his voice carrying the weight of history. "You are alone in this land, Isaac Monroe, yet you chose to act, to place yourself against forces that do not forgive mistakes. Tell me, what do you seek?" Isaac met the gaze steadily. "Survival," he said simply, "and to protect what is right. I do not seek favor, only to do what must be done." He felt the sincerity in his own words, the truth of his intentions, and held the line, knowing that any hint of weakness or deceit could have consequences beyond his understanding. Nanton's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity of his presence remained. He studied Isaac for a long moment, measuring, evaluating, weighing action against character. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter but no less powerful. "Courage and honor are measured not in words but in deeds. You have shown both. Yet the threat remains. Hargrove will not yield easily." Isaac nodded. He had anticipated as much. The desert was vast, yes, but it was also unforgiving, and Caleb Hargrove was patient, calculated, relentless. They would have to act with precision, using strategy, terrain, and the element of surprise. The presence of Chief Nanton changed the equation, introducing not only authority, but potential allies, but also new variables, new uncertainties. Aiyana stepped forward slightly, her voice low but clear. "Father, I trust him," she said, glancing at Isaac. "He saved me. He has kept me alive. He understands what must be done." Nanton regarded her with a long, penetrating gaze. Then slowly he nodded. "Very well. You have my attention, Isaac Monroe. But know this, the balance of life and death is delicate. One misstep, one lapse of judgment, and the consequences will fall not just on you, but on all of us." Isaac felt the gravity of those words. The desert was no longer simply a place of survival. It had become a stage for judgment, strategy, and alliance. The presence of Chief Nanton was both reassurance and warning. The girl he had rescued was not just anyone, and the man he faced in Hargrove was not merely a criminal. He was a predator with resources, skill, and ruthlessness. Aiyana's eyes met Isaac's, her dark gaze steady and unwavering. They had come this far together, through nights of uncertainty, through fear and vigilance, through silence and subtle communication. Now they were about to face not only Hargrove's men, but the judgment of a powerful chief whose approval and insight could alter the course of events. The wind shifted, carrying the faint sounds of hooves and movement from the approaching men. Hargrove had not waited. The confrontation was imminent. Isaac adjusted his stance, rifle ready. Muscles coiled, mind focused. He glanced at Aiyana, who mirrored his readiness, and then toward Chief Nantan, whose calm presence conveyed authority, expectation, and the weight of consequence. Nantan's voice cut across the distance, steady, commanding. "Prepare yourselves. Hargrove will test us, but we will not falter. Honor and courage will guide our actions. Let the desert witness who stands with truth and who falls to greed." Isaac drew a deep breath, feeling the tension ripple through him. The enemy advanced, the desert held its silence, and the stakes had never been higher. Every instinct, every skill, every ounce of courage would be tested. They would face the reckoning together, under the watchful eyes of Chief Nantan, the unforgiving sun, and the vast, silent desert. And in that moment, Isaac Monroe realized the full magnitude of the challenge ahead. Survival depended not only on courage and skill, but on trust, alliance, and the unyielding will to face what no man could endure alone. The shadow of Hargrove loomed closer, and the next hours would determine not just lives, but legacies. The sun climbed higher over the desert, burning away the lingering shadows of dawn, yet the tension remained thick, heavy as the heat that pressed upon Isaac Monroe's shoulders. He stood near the cabin, rifle in hand, glancing between Aiyana and Chief Nantan, whose watchful eyes never left the horizon. The distant figures of Hargrove's men were no longer indistinct shapes. They had come closer, deliberate, organized, the precision of their movement betraying the cunning of their leader. Aiyana shifted beside Isaac, her dark eyes reflecting the firelight and a simmering tension born of anticipation. She had always been perceptive, alert to every nuance of the desert, every subtle whisper in the wind. But now she seemed to understand something even deeper, a secret that Isaac could sense but not yet fully grasp. Chief Nantan's gaze swept across the horizon, his presence both reassuring and formidable. "They will not yield," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom. "Hargrove is cunning. He does not seek simple victory. He seeks leverage, fear, and control. Know this, Isaac Monroe, what he pursues is not mere profit. It is power over bloodlines, over trust, over life itself." Isaac's jaw tightened. He had known Hargrove was dangerous, ruthless, and patient, but the chief's words painted a more intricate picture. This was not just a man hunting a girl for ransom. This was a predator weaving a web of manipulation, threatening not only Aiyana's life, but the balance of influence across the plains. Aiyana glanced at him, her voice steady, carrying the weight of both knowledge and fear. "He knows who I am," she said. "He knows who my father is. He seeks to use me to bend the Apache people to his will, and he will not stop until he succeeds." Isaac's mind raced. Every instinct screamed urgency. The enemy was not merely approaching. They were calculating, strategic, and cruel. The tracks, the shadows, the faint glint of metal in the morning sun all pointed to the same truth. Hargrove was not acting recklessly. He was testing them, probing for weaknesses, seeking the exact moment to strike. Chief Nantan stepped closer, placing a firm hand on Aiyana's shoulder. "Your knowledge is a weapon," he said, "but knowledge without action is useless. Isaac, you have acted bravely, but the desert will demand more. You must anticipate, plan, and execute. Hargrove will exploit hesitation. You cannot afford it." Isaac nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. Every choice from this moment onward would determine survival, and the margin for error was razor thin. Hargrove's men were trained killers, patient and precise, and now with Chief Nantan's guidance and Aiyana's insight, Isaac could hope to counter their advantage, but only if he acted decisively. Aiyana moved beside him, crouched low, her hand brushing the dagger concealed beneath her cloak. "We cannot wait for him to strike first," she said. "We must show strength and make him hesitate. His strategy relies on fear and calculation. If we disrupt it, we may gain the upper hand." Isaac considered her words. She was right. Hargrove would exploit delay. He would wait for fear, for hesitation, for a mistake. They could not allow that. Preparation, precision, and timing were now their greatest assets. Every shadow, every ridge, every subtle movement of the enemy could be turned against them if they acted intelligently. The wind shifted, carrying with it a faint metallic scent, the faint tang of weapons of leather, of humans moving in synchronization. Isaac's eyes narrowed. He could see Hargrove now mounted, surveying the terrain, commanding the movements of his men with subtle gestures. The predator was patient, aware, deliberate, and he had underestimated nothing. Isaac whispered to Aiyana, "We have to anticipate him, predict his moves. Watch the ridge, the shadows, his signals. Every gesture counts." She nodded, eyes trained on the enemy, absorbing every detail, analyzing every possible angle. Their communication, silent but precise, reflected the bond they had forged through nights of fear, vigilance, and survival. The first real movement from Hargrove's men came as a faint whistle, high and sharp, carried on the wind. Isaac recognized it instantly, a signal, a coordinated command. The men shifted, spreading into new positions, their weapons glinting in the sunlight. Hargrove had begun the engagement. Chief Nanton stepped forward, voice calm but commanding, cutting through the tension like a blade. "They seek to divide us to test our resolve, but they will find that courage and honor are not easily broken. Prepare yourselves. Observe, calculate, and act only when necessary, but act decisively." Isaac's pulse raced. Every muscle coiled, every sense alert. He moved into position carefully, using the rocks and shadows for cover, while Aiyana mirrored his actions, silent, precise, lethal, if necessary. The desert, once a vast expanse of isolation, had become a crucible compressing time, attention, and skill into a single decisive confrontation. As the distance closed, Isaac realized the full magnitude of Hargrove's plan. It was not simply about capturing Aiyana. It was about leverage, about power, about breaking spirits and controlling outcomes. He understood now why Hargrove had been so meticulous, so patient. He was a strategist who thrived on fear calculation and the exploitation of every misstep. Isaac glanced at Aiyana, then to Chief Nanton. They were ready, aligned, and aware of the stakes. The desert seemed to hold its breath. The shadows stretched long, and the heat pressed down like an invisible weight. Caleb Hargrove was coming, and the first move would define the battle, the survival of 2 lives, and the balance of honor across the plains. Suddenly, a figure broke from the ridge, moving swiftly toward the cabin, rifle raised, intent clear. The confrontation had begun. Isaac adjusted his stance, gripping his rifle muscles, coiled eyes narrowing on the approaching threat. Aiyana mirrored him, dagger ready, every movement precise, controlled, deliberate. Chief Nanton's voice cut through the tension, firm and unwavering. "Now, Isaac, act with courage, with honor, and with precision. The desert witnesses all. Let our actions speak louder than words." Isaac took a deep breath, heart hammering, knowing that every decision, every second could be the difference between survival and death. The enemy was upon them, and the desert itself seemed to pulse with anticipation. The battle for Aiyana's life, for justice, and for honor had truly begun. The desert had grown silent in the tense moments before action. The wind stilled as if holding its breath. Isaac Monroe crouched behind the jagged rocks, rifle-steady eyes locked on the advancing figures of Caleb Hargrove and his men. Every muscle in his body was taut, every sense heightened to a razor's edge. The early sun painted the plains in harsh light, illuminating the glint of metal, the careful coordination of the enemy, and the silent determination in Aiyana's dark eyes beside him. Isaac's mind raced. The stakes were immense. Hargrove was not a man who relied solely on brute force. He was cunning, strategic, patient. Every move was calculated, every pause measured to exploit fear or hesitation. But Isaac had something Hargrove could not predict: familiarity with the terrain, an instinctive understanding of the desert's subtleties, and a young Apache girl whose awareness rivaled any seasoned scout. Aiyana's hand brushed against his arm, a silent signal. She had spotted a shift in Hargrove's formation, a slight slack in the coordination, a gap in the line that could be exploited. Isaac nodded imperceptibly, acknowledging the silent communication they had honed over days of tension. Every glance, every gesture, every subtle movement was now a tool for survival. The first whistle cut across the plain, a sharp, piercing note that carried authority. Hargrove's men shifted instantly, spreading into positions calculated to pin Isaac and Aiyana. The predator had revealed his hand. The time for waiting had ended. Isaac rose slightly, using the rocks for cover, scanning the distance. He spotted Hargrove himself mounted, surveying the terrain with a calm, predatory patience. The man's eyes glinted with malice, reflecting not just calculation, but the thrill of the hunt. Isaac's pulse quickened, but he did not falter. Every lesson from his father, every skill honed in years of desert survival, every instinct he possessed now demanded action. Aiyana mirrored his readiness, dagger in hand, eyes scanning the ridge for threats, calculating distances and timing. Isaac realized the depth of her skill, the way her people had trained her to observe, anticipate, and act decisively. Together, they formed a silent unit, coordinated, vigilant, prepared to turn the desert itself against the hunters. Suddenly, a gunshot rang out loud, precise and terrifying in the still desert air. One of Hargrove's scouts felt the recoil of panic rippling through the ranks. Isaac fired a careful shot, in return aimed to disrupt rather than kill, forcing a temporary retreat and opening a window of opportunity. The dance had begun a dangerous game of strategy, timing, and nerves. Aiyana darted forward, using cover to approach a small outcrop ready to flank. Isaac covered her eyes, darting between the approaching figures and the broader terrain. Hargrove's men were skilled, but their confidence was beginning to waver in the face of unexpected resistance. Isaac could see it, the subtle hesitations, the tiny shifts in posture, the imperceptible glances toward each other for reassurance. Then came the moment that Isaac had anticipated. Hargrove himself moved closer, dismounting and advancing toward the cabin with deliberate purpose. The predator now faced the man who had defied him. Every step was measured, every motion precise, and Isaac's muscles coiled, ready to act. Aiyana was beside him, dagger raised, eyes locked on the unfolding scene. Hargrove's voice cut through the tense silence, cold and commanding. "Isaac Monroe," he said, the words sharp as steel. "You should have left the girl and walked away. Now you will pay." Isaac's reply was calm, steady, unwavering. "I protect those who cannot protect themselves," he said. "You'll find I do not back down easily." The confrontation escalated quickly. Shots rang out, dust and sand kicked into the air, and the desert seemed to echo with the tension of life and death. Isaac and Aiyana moved as one, coordinated, agile, anticipating Hargrove's strategies, exploiting every lapse in his men's formation. Yet despite their skill, the enemy was relentless, closing in, driving them toward a high ridge where escape would be impossible. In the chaos, a sudden movement caught Isaac's attention, one of Hargrove's men attempting to flank Aiyana from behind. Without hesitation, Isaac leapt into the path, rifle swinging, and a brief struggle ensued. The man fell, but in the process, Isaac was struck a sharp pain exploding in his side. He stumbled, heart hammering, aware that any weakness could be fatal. Aiyana reacted instantly, thrusting her dagger with precision, neutralizing the threat. Isaac caught his breath, eyes blazing with determination. He realized that survival depended not just on skill, but on trust and unity. Aiyana had learned to move instinctively alongside him, her instincts and courage compensating for his momentary vulnerability. Hargrove observed from a distance, calculating, measuring. The predator understood that Isaac's resolve was formidable, that Aiyana's presence added complexity to the pursuit. He signaled his men, attempting to regroup, but the desert itself, rugged and unpredictable, favored the defenders who knew its subtle shifts and hidden advantages. Isaac forced himself to rise, ignoring the pain, and moved to cover Aiyana. "We finish this together," he whispered. She nodded, eyes blazing, muscles tense, ready to act. They were aligned, each movement deliberate. Every decision coordinated, every breath controlled. The desert became a stage for their courage, their skill, and their unyielding will. The climactic moment approached. Hargrove moved closer, underestimating the bond between rescuer and rescued, the combined vigilance of a man who had survived the harshest conditions and a girl whose instincts were honed by her people's traditions. The confrontation reached its peak, every second stretched to the limit, every decision carrying the weight of life and death. Then, unexpectedly, one of Hargrove's men made a reckless move, giving Isaac the opening he needed. He fired a precise shot, forcing the group to scatter temporarily. Aiyana seized the moment, moving decisively, striking with her dagger and driving back the attackers. The balance of power shifted subtly, yet the threat remained looming and immediate. In the chaos, Isaac realized the magnitude of their predicament. Hargrove's men were dangerous, patient, and skilled, but their confidence had been shaken. The desert, vast and merciless, had become their ally, and their unity, courage, and strategy were beginning to turn the tide. Yet he knew the confrontation was not over, far from it. The final moment of tension lingered as Hargrove's eyes met Isaac's. The predator recognized the man who had defied him, the resilience, courage, and cunning that could not be underestimated. And in that instant, Isaac understood the truth. Survival depended on the unbreakable bond he had forged with Aiyana, on their combined courage, and on their willingness to act decisively, even at great personal risk. The desert waited. Hargrove paused, assessing, calculating, and in that pause, Isaac Monroe knew that the next actions, every choice, every movement, could decide the fate of their lives, the life of Aiyana, and the balance of honor and courage across the unforgiving West. The first rays of dawn stretched across the desert, turning the sand and mesas into a golden sea. The night's chaos had subsided, replaced by an eerie stillness that pressed down on Isaac Monroe like a weight he could not shake. He rose slowly, muscles aching from tension and exertion, every sense still alert to the faintest movement across the plains. The battle with Caleb Hargrove's men had passed, or at least paused, but its impact lingered in the air, tangible and oppressive. Isaac glanced at Aiyana, who crouched beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon, as though the morning might conceal yet another threat. The young Apache girl had proven herself resilient, her instincts guiding them through the peril of the night. She had been his partner, his ally, and in many ways the reason he had survived the relentless pursuit of Hargrove. He could see the exhaustion etched into her face, yet also a quiet determination, a spark that refused to be extinguished. The desert seemed to exhale, releasing the tension that had held it in a taut grip. Dust swirled lazily in the gentle morning breeze, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and scorched earth. Isaac moved carefully, surveying the area around the cabin. The tracks of Hargrove's men were still visible, scattered and disrupted by the night's struggle. It was a reminder that their adversary had been here, that danger had brushed close enough to test their courage and resolve. Aiyana's gaze met Isaac's. There was a moment of silent communication, an understanding forged in the crucible of shared danger. "They've gone for now," she whispered, her voice soft yet firm. "But he will return." Isaac nodded, acknowledging both the relief and the lingering threat. Hargrove was patient, cunning, and relentless. This encounter had been a test, a probing of strength and strategy. But Isaac understood that the battle was not over. The desert had taught him that danger often returned when least expected and with greater intensity than before. He turned his attention to the cabin, noting the damage from the night's events. A splintered shutter, a faint scorch mark from a stray bullet, signs of the struggle that had unfolded under the cover of darkness. Isaac's mind raced with the task ahead, fortifying the cabin, tending to wounds, and preparing for the inevitable return of Hargrove. Yet amidst the practical concerns, a deeper reflection began to take hold. The night had tested them, and they had endured. Courage, trust, and the bond between rescuer and rescued had carried them through. Aiyana moved closer, kneeling beside him as she inspected the area for any overlooked threats. "We survived because we worked together," she said quietly. "And because you protected me when it mattered most." Isaac allowed himself a small nod, acknowledging the truth in her words. The partnership they had formed, born of circumstance, strengthened by danger, was more than mere survival. It was a connection forged in trust, resilience, and the shared understanding of the stakes. In the unforgiving desert, such bonds were rare and precious, and he realized that he would not have made it through the night without her insight, courage, and vigilance. The wind shifted again, carrying with it the faintest sound of movement from the distant ridge. Isaac tensed, rifle at the ready. Yet as his eyes adjusted to the morning light, he realized the shapes were not hostile. They were figures moving cautiously, perhaps scouts or travelers who had witnessed the aftermath. The desert had a way of revealing truth, slowly testing patience and offering moments of clarity amidst chaos. Chief Nantan appeared at the edge of the ridge, his figure commanding even in the soft glow of dawn. His presence was a reminder of authority, wisdom, and the delicate balance between justice and survival. He approached with deliberate steps, eyes sweeping over the terrain, assessing both the aftermath and the integrity of those who had endured the night. Isaac straightened, rifle lowered, but still ready as the chief reached them. Aiyana stood beside him, her posture alert yet respectful, acknowledging both her father's authority and the delicate achievement of survival. Nantan's gaze swept across them, lingering on Isaac, assessing courage, intention, and the unspoken bonds that had carried them through the night. "You have endured," Nantan said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of experience and authority. "And you have acted with honor, yet the desert is unforgiving and Hargrove's malice remains. You must remain vigilant." Isaac nodded, understanding the gravity of the chief's words. The danger had been mitigated for now, but the lessons of the desert were clear. Vigilance, courage, and trust were as essential as any weapon. The encounter had tested them, revealed the depth of their abilities, and forged a bond that would carry them forward. Aiyana spoke softly, glancing at Isaac. "We are not out of danger, but we have learned, and we have each other." Her words resonated deeply with him. In that moment, Isaac realized that the night's struggle had transformed them. They were no longer simply rescuer and rescued, they were partners equals in resolve, courage, and determination. The morning light revealed the desert in all its stark beauty, the golden sands stretching endlessly, the mesas standing like silent sentinels over the plains. Isaac took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the sun and the calm after the storm settle within him. The battle had tested them, and they had endured. Yet the desert's lessons remained. Vigilance, patience, and the unbreakable bonds of trust were the keys to survival. He turned to Aiyana, her dark eyes meeting his with a quiet understanding. "We face what comes together," he said. "No matter the danger we endure, we survive." Aiyana nodded, a faint smile touching her lips. It was a small victory, fragile yet profound, a moment of shared triumph amidst uncertainty. The desert had tested them, Hargrove had threatened them, and yet they had endured. The bond between them, forged in fear, vigilance, and courage, was unbreakable. Isaac glanced at the distant ridge, aware that Hargrove could return at any moment. But for now, they had survived. They had endured the night, faced the predator, and emerged stronger, wiser, and united. The desert, vast and merciless, had been both adversary and ally, teaching lessons in courage, patience, and the power of trust. As the sun climbed higher, casting the desert in brilliant light, Isaac and Aiyana stood together, ready to face whatever the plains might offer next. They had survived the night, confronted danger, and forged a bond that could withstand even the harshest trials. The desert stretched before them, endless and unforgiving, yet they faced it not as individuals, but as a united front. The future remained uncertain, but one truth was undeniable: courage, trust, and determination had carried them through the crucible of the night and would continue to guide them across the vast, untamed West. The desert had settled into a calm that felt almost sacred, the air warm with the gentle rays of the midday sun. Isaac Monroe stood outside the cabin, surveying the plains that stretched endlessly before him. The events of the past days, the struggle against Caleb Hargrove, the tense nights, the lessons learned under the unforgiving desert sky had changed him. He was no longer just a solitary farmer. He was a guardian, a man tested by danger and strengthened by the bond he had formed with Aiyana. Aiyana stood beside him, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with the same vigilance that had kept them alive through countless threats. Yet now there was a sense of calm in her posture, a subtle relaxation that spoke of relief and of trust firmly established. She had survived the night, faced the danger, and grown in confidence and courage. The child who had been terrified and silent was now a partner capable and resilient, shaped by experience and guided by instinct. Chief Nantan appeared from the ridge, his presence commanding, yet measured, his gaze sweeping over both Isaac and Aiyana. There was no trace of judgment in his expression, now only acknowledgement and respect. The chief's presence was a reminder of the weight of legacy, of honor, and of the delicate balance between courage and wisdom. Isaac understood that this was a moment of recognition, not just for him, but for the bond that had been forged through adversity. "You have acted with honor," Nantan said, his voice carrying across the plains with quiet authority. "The threats have passed for now, but the lessons remain. Courage, patience, and trust. These are your true weapons. Remember them." Isaac nodded, feeling the full weight of the chief's words. The desert had tested them, Hargrove had threatened them, and yet they had endured. The bond between him and Aiyana, forged in the crucible of danger, had been the key to survival. It was a connection that transcended fear, culture, and circumstance, grounded in trust and shared purpose. Aiyana turned to Isaac, her expression calm but determined. "We face the future together," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "Whatever comes, we endure. We survive." Isaac allowed himself a small smile, a rare moment of warmth breaking through the tension that had dominated the past days. Together, he echoed. The word carried weight, carrying the promise of unity, protection, and resilience. They had survived the desert, Caleb Hargrove, and the challenges of fear and uncertainty. Now they could look forward not with naivety, but with confidence born of shared experience. The plains stretched endlessly before them, the golden sands dotted with sagebrush and rocky outcrops. The desert, once a place of isolation and danger, had become a witness to their courage, a canvas on which their story had been etched. Every ridge, every shadow, every subtle movement of the wind had been a test, and they had passed. Yet Isaac knew that survival was not a single moment, but a continuous challenge. Vigilance, strategy, and trust would remain essential, but now they had a foundation stronger than fear. They began to move cautiously at first, surveying the cabin, the surrounding terrain, and the distant ridges. Isaac knew that Hargrove could return patient and relentless, but he also understood that the lessons learned, the skills honed, and the bond with Aiyana would give them an edge in any future confrontation. They were prepared not through arrogance, but through experience and unity. Aiyana's gaze softened, and for the first time she allowed herself to relax slightly, the tension in her shoulders easing. Isaac noticed the subtle change, and it filled him with a quiet sense of relief. They had endured the trials of the desert together, faced danger, and emerged stronger. Trust had been established, courage had been tested, and the bond between them had been forged in the fires of adversity. Chief Nanton approached, placing a hand lightly on Aiyana's shoulder. "You have both demonstrated the strength of character and unity necessary to survive in these lands. Let this be a lesson not only in courage, but in understanding respect and the power of trust." His gaze shifted to Isaac. "Remember, the desert tests all who dwell within it, but it also rewards those who act with honor and who respect the lives of others." Isaac nodded, absorbing the wisdom in the chief's words. The desert had been harsh, unforgiving, and at times merciless. Yet it had also been a teacher, offering lessons in observation, patience, strategy, and the importance of forming bonds, even in the most unlikely circumstances. He understood now that survival was as much about human connection as it was about skill or instinct. Aiyana spoke softly, looking out over the plains. "We will honor what we have learned," she said, "and we will protect what is precious. Together we can face whatever comes next." Isaac felt a surge of determination, a sense of purpose that had been tempered and strengthened through the trials they had faced. He realized that the desert, with all its challenges, had prepared them not just for survival, but for a life defined by courage, trust, and mutual respect. The bond between them, forged through danger and shared experience, would guide them forward, offering strength in the face of any adversity. As they stood together surveying the vast expanse of desert before them, Isaac understood the significance of the moment. The night's ordeal had ended, but the lessons remained. Courage was essential, yes, but so were trust, patience, and understanding. The bond between rescuer and rescued, between man and girl, had proven stronger than fear, more resilient than threat, and more enduring than the harshest challenges the desert could present. The desert wind shifted, carrying with it the faint scent of sage and sun-warmed earth. Isaac and Aiyana exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of their journey, their shared trials, and the unity that had brought them through the storm. They had faced danger, confronted cruelty, and emerged not only alive, but strengthened, prepared, and united. The plains stretched before them, endless and unforgiving, yet filled with the promise of survival, courage, and hope. Isaac Monroe and Aiyana, bound by experience, trust, and determination, stepped forward together, ready to face whatever the untamed West might offer. Their journey had transformed them, forging a bond that could withstand any trial, and teaching a lesson that would endure beyond the desert itself. True courage is measured not by the absence of fear, but by the strength to act with honor, trust, and unwavering resolve. Life, much like the desert, is unforgiving and unpredictable. Challenges arise without warning, testing our courage, our patience, and the bonds we form with others. Isaac Monroe's journey with Aiyana teaches us that survival is not just about strength or skill, but about trust, understanding, and the willingness to act when it matters most. True courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to face danger with honor and resolve. The connection forged through shared adversity, respect, and empathy can transform fear into resilience and uncertainty into hope. Think of the people in your life, those who walk with you through trials and tribulations. Cherish the trust, the loyalty, and the courage you share, for these bonds are the true measure of strength. Take a moment to reflect who has stood by you in moments of challenge, and how can you honor that bond today? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to witness more stories of courage, trust, and the untamed spirit of the Wild West.